Born in London in '86, a stacho gent named Richard Parliament. He loves to wrestle, but he loves one more thing: handhelds round the world. He fights in his comments and he argues with fans. It's a problem no one understands. If there's two things he loves, it's getting handhelds round the world. Drinking fine wine, fighting fanboys, handhelds round the world.
Top Hat Gaming Man.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. After a change in UK quarantine laws, I found myself leaving Greece this year earlier than expected. However, whilst I waited for a taxi to pick me up and take me to the airport, I found the time to both eat my last gyros of the year and shoot an episode of Handhelds Around the World. Not only that, but being the multitasking efficient genius that I am, I managed to do both of these things simultaneously. Yeah! In an earlier episode in this block, we looked at the ridiculous Game Boy port of Killer Instinct. A ridiculous thing to exist really, considering that the whole purpose of the Killer Instinct franchise was to build hype for the Nintendo 64. The original arcade game even touted that the game would be available in your home exclusively on that powerful system. So the fact that they released a Game Boy version of the game proved they were lying. Today we are going to be looking at another portable game that's very existence seems to be paradoxical. Tekken for the Game Boy Bloody Advance. Much like Killer Instinct before it, Tekken was another fighting game franchise that, although offered great gameplay, became hugely popular off of the back of the fantastic for its time graphics. Namco's Tekken series on the Sony PlayStation consoles are amongst some of the best-selling games on the very best-selling consoles of all time. They epitomise commercial success and captured the very zeitgeist of late 90s gaming culture by delivering fighting game experiences the mainstream of the PlayStation's consumer base absolutely adored. This series pretty much gave the average player everything they could have possibly wanted at the time. Easy pick up and play controls, great music, and a slew of interesting unlockable characters that kept gamers intrigued. Further to this, and most importantly of all, the cutting edge graphics the entire series offered. Tekken games tended to be at the forefront when it came to delivering fighting games featuring the popular polygon graphics style, with these Namco games looking visually more impressive than other titles on the market. Even the Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat franchises could not keep up with Tekken sales at the time, leading for a good while to Tekken becoming the world's most popular fighting game series. When Tekken Tag Tournament launched with the PlayStation 2 for example, it was often promoted as the console's killer app, leading to very few people purchasing Street Fighter EX3 instead, another very early PS2 release. So keeping all of this in mind, why was a franchise that was made popular by offering players the most flashy graphics around now available in the form of a Game Boy frickin' Advance game? The very notion of this game's existence just seems ridiculous, so I guess we should check this game out in more detail to see if this game delivers a decent Tekken experience, or whether it is no more than a very cheeky cash grab. Let's find out. As demonstrated on the channel before, we know that despite the Game Boy Advance's limited button layout, the device was capable of delivering some very decent fighting game experiences for its size. For example, we got Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo Revival, the first upgrade Street Fighter 2 had received since 1994, and a more than adequate game it was. But Street Fighter 2 was originally just a Capcom System 1 game, not a bloody polygon based title, so surely translating such success would be more challenging for Namco with their Tekken brand. Tekken Advance was first released in December of 2001, and despite Tekken Tag for the PlayStation 2 already existing, Tekken Advance would take more pages from the Tekken 3 book, which I guess makes sense considering Tekken 3 was an earlier, more basic game. In a way, I guess this title is pretty historic, as it marks the first time a Tekken game was available on Nintendo hardware as opposed to a PlayStation. For Sony systems, the Tekken brand had become so heavily associated with. So rather than beating around the bush regarding history any further, let's delve straight into what this game actually plays like. Instantly, the first thing you are going to notice about the title is how strikingly different it looks from other entries in the series. The Game Boy Advance simply was not capable of pulling off PlayStation-like graphics, but given the limitations, Namco did a good job in creating a game that looks as Tekken-like on the hardware as possible. Tekken Advance is a sprite-based fighting game that plays using pre-rendered character models rather than using fully rendered polygonal characters. Despite this, the polygonal look is still somewhat maintained, as it appears that the creators of this game used the same techniques to create this experience that were implemented into the creation of Donkey Kong Country or Killer Instinct, which is probably the most apt comparison considering Killer Instinct and Tekken Advance are both fighting games. In terms of graphics, as you can see, gameplay can be choppy at times, but overall the game looks nice for what it is. There are even some nice graphical effects present too, such as the camera zooms further out to reveal more of the playfield if one of the combatants is launched into the air. Throughout encounters you will also notice that it looks like the camera rotates at points to create a 3D effect. These Mode 7-like graphics not only make the game look more impressive, but it also creates a nice feeling of depth. When it comes to fighting games, the most important factor that comes into play is obviously how well this game handles. Traditionally, most fighting games usually feature controls that take advantage of large button layouts, in many cases even up to 6 buttons. For this reason, the Game Boy Advance's lack of buttons in comparison to a PlayStation controller would prove a further barrier in creating this game, outside of just the graphical limitations. So, as one would expect, this title has a vastly altered control scheme to what seasoned Tekken players would be used to. Tekken Advance features a 3-button layout. 1 button is reserved for punching, another for kicking, and 1 for executing throws. When it comes to the 4th button, we will talk about its function shortly. Tekken Advance maintains the tradition of allowing players to pull off special moves by mixing directional inputs with button presses. However, the game compensates for its lack of buttons by requiring players to hold down the directional pad and hitting buttons at points simultaneously. Again, I would imagine this change would probably be highly noticeable if you were a Tekken addict. But for more casual consumers, who I assume this game was aimed at anyway, it is probably a non-issue. Speaking of moves, whilst the game is based on Tekken 3, every character's move lists have been shrunk and condensed down somewhat for this pocket-sized experience. Another huge factor when it comes to the appeal of games from the fighting game genre is of course the selection of fighters themselves. Tekken Advance offers a respectable sized roster for a handheld game. Players are given a base lineup of 9 fighters consisting of many Tekken 3 favourites. Sadly though, this game only has one unlockable fighter, Heihachi, who also serves as the game's final boss. His inclusion brings the total number of fighters in this game up to 10. I don't know about you, but for me personally, one of the most appealing features about the Tekken series that always had me coming back for more was for the challenge and surprise of unlocking a huge selection of secret characters. To me, this was always great fun, and a fantastic reward for completing arcade mode. So I guess this game's 10 characters is quite a step down from the 24 included in Tekken 3. The title this game was trying to capture the spirit of. A feature that this title did not skimp on was the inclusion of multiple play modes. The game of course includes the classic main arcade mode, but also features a time attack mode and a practice mode, and even a tag team mode, players. Speaking of this feature, this is where their 4th GBA button comes into play. It is used for tagging in and out. Holla holla holla. One more feature of note is that Tekken Advance is a game that takes advantage of the Game Boy Advance's link cable feature. This means 2 players can face off against each other in the title's versus mode, or even take part in versus tag battles. Overall, meaning the game offers its fair share of versatility for a handheld game that came out in the year 2001. In conclusion, I am pleasantly surprised with Tekken Advance, as it is certainly not a title you seem to hear talked about very often. So I was expecting the absolute worst. Surprisingly, I feel the game is decent, and the developers did a great job with this game, working around the Game Boy Advance's hardware limitations. I have to say, I certainly think it is strange that a sprite-based Tekken game exists, considering the franchise sold so well based off of its fantastic use of rendered polygons. But the pre-rendered Killer Instinct style graphics do an adequate job of delivering Tekken-like play, especially when you account for the game's camera effects too. This is a novel title that, in my opinion, is worth your time. That's what I think of the game today, ladies and gentlemen, but let's see what journalists thought of this game on release. GameSpot would state, Namco may have had to cut a few corners to fit the 3D fighter onto Nintendo's handheld, but the end product looks and feels enough like the original game to succeed. On its own merits, Tekken Advance is a solid fighting game. That said, some long-time fans of the series may find themselves stumbling over the game's timing changes or simplified movesets, but the differences are noticeable enough to keep Tekken Advance from being a game worth playing. And thankfully, it has more to offer than just the novelty of seeing yet another series favourably scaled down to handheld size. IGN would write, it's definitely a trip to see Tekken on a handheld, but what's more is to have it relatively intact on lesser capable hardware like the Game Boy Advance. Naturally, Tekken's better off on the console and arcade systems, but it's nice to know that Tekken fans can get their fix on the go with Tekken Advance. Tekken Advance is an extremely pretty game and a relatively fun game, though it's more fun if you include an actual human opponent into the mix. The fighting engine is a great one on the GBA. Don't expect anything more than that and you'll be a happy camper. As you can see from these excerpts, journalists in 2001 felt pretty much the same way about this game as I feel today. For a Game Boy Advance game, Tekken Advance certainly delivers considering hardware circumstances, but obviously we are still better off playing Tekken 3 on the PlayStation. This may be the case, but no one could play that classic on the go at the dawn of the millennium, so Tekken Advance would have been a more than decent purchase. Hell, for its uniqueness, it is still worth your time today. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this rather delicious episode of Handhelds Around the World. It was great to talk about an underrepresented game from one of the most important fighting game franchises in history. In fact, I guess based on how many views this video receives, it will give me a good indication on how interested you would be for me to cover more Tekken games in the future. If you enjoyed learning about this bizarre 2D entry in the series, then consider subscribing to this channel and hitting the notification bell for in-depth coverage on the history of a different fighting game every week. And I also upload content covering other subjects such as beat 'em ups, wrestling games and console gaming in general too. So why not check out my backlog and leave some comments giving your opinions on whatever topic I have discussed. Such regular content is possible due to the fact that I work on YouTube videos on a full-time basis. So as usual, I would like to give a special thank you to the people on Patreon who make making content even possible by backing this channel. Huge shout outs and thank yous go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, A Murder of Crows, Heo Paulo Lopez, Joseph Razmek, Doug Perkins, Corey Imarsh Sr., Lou Johnson, BXL Gotham, Rowan Dinch, Evan Balder, Philip Manth, Cambo Rambo 82, Azra Rarakai, Keith Ferguson, Dropkin Varela, Prince Knight, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, TOG Driver, Angel Light 85, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Princess Anna, Carlos Domingos, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of the Ted, Sponge Matt B, Gary Pinkett, EC Professor, Tony Tran, Aaron McNamara, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Posty XL, Michael Hall, Wesley Sang He, Ted Stickles, Langston Miller, Noob, Ryan Barry, Sir Lagney, Stephen Lewis, Sarah Powell, Lamink Renee, Sarai H. Al Sarai, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Crazy Yarl, Dan Van Dammit, Adam Castin, Lewis Fiant, John Bates, David Bale, Chris Fisk, Paul Elliott, Me Machine Dean, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Hans Christian, Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, Retroversion.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai and Andrew Bazansky. I would like to thank all of you and all of my other patrons, of course, very, very, very much. Me love you long time. Yeah. Cheerio.